Welcome into CyHawk Talk here on a Wednesday, talking a little bit about the Cyclones, a little bit about the Hawkeyes. It's an interesting time of the year, kind of getting into the point where we really know who these teams are, and you can really start projecting really well and kind of getting a feel for how you think the season's going to go. Ben, how are things going for you on this fine Wednesday?
It's so funny, Ethan. We all waited so long for football to be back. And last week we got the glorious football weekend with, the Ryder Cup mixed in there too. Just an awesome weekend of football. But we forget the one bad part of football. The part that we all like to forget are the injuries. And those became a massive storyline this week across the state. What's the latest on the main injury I think people are talking about, Mark Gronowski?
I not just across the state, but in the NFL as well. I feel like, Malik Neighbors, Tyreek Hill both going out. Bucky Irving is going to be out now.
Yeah.
Trey Benson, the backup running back for the Cardinals, is now out as well. My fantasy football teams are all in disarray. But yeah, injuries have been the kind of the name of the game. And boy, I wish we would have gotten a little bit more on Mark Gronowski's injury yesterday from offensive coordinator Tim Lester, where all he could say is it's cloudy right now and ask Coach Ferentz next week, which was about the worst possible update we could have got. Fortunately, there was a little bit more we got later in the press conference, which was, do you hope he'll be able to play against Wisconsin? And he says, I hope so. He's rehabbing right now. And then when asked, it was kind of said as a statement, but also as a question from Chad Leistic out from the Des Moines Register. He's like, not season ending. And Lester just kind of laughed awkwardly and then knocked on the lectern as if to say, knock on wood, don't tempt fate here. So there's clearly the potential that if they rush Gronowski back, this is a season ending injury, which leads me to believe it's a little bit more serious. And there is a chance that he doesn't play against Wisconsin. I think on Sunday I was 60-40, maybe even 75-25 on Sunday when we recorded that he would play against Wisconsin. I think I'm at a 30-70. I think there's a 70% chance he doesn't play against Wisconsin at this point. And so I think, you kind of got to hold your breath until Tuesday to get a real legitimate update on Gronowski. And I have a feeling that we're going to find out that he's going to be a game time decision on Tuesday. Which will feel like another non-update because it's like, well, that's where we were on Tuesday. It's like, well, we're not sure if he's going to play or not, and now we're still not sure if he's going to play or not. So I think ultimately we'll know 2 hours before that game in Camp Randall whether or not he's going to play when they release that availability report.
Weird, weird vibes. Ethan, it sounds like it might be time to dust off the QBometer from last season's CyHawk Talk. Is it still around? We might need to dust it off.
I would hate to have to recreate that one. But the one good thing is I think that Iowa is in a better place than it was last year with the QB Spectrum was the name of that
The
ridiculous segment.
Spectrum, yes, yeah, yeah.
But when we were trying to decide between Cade McNamara and Brendan Sullivan, I think that both Hank Brown and Mark Gronowski are clear upgrades on both those guys. Obviously, it felt like Brendan maybe offered a higher ceiling for the Hawkeyes than Cade McNamara did last year, but maybe a bit of a lower floor as well. I think that that ceiling has been raised as well as the floor with Gronowski and Hank Brown. And I think the interesting thing when I asked Coach Lester on Tuesday, what changes when Hank comes into the game versus when Mark's in the game? Because we've seen Mark's legs be such a important part of his game. 7 rushing touchdowns, 150 rushing yards through the first 5 games of the season. Unfortunately, also one major injury on a rushing play. But he said, I think that Hank's a little bit more athletic than you might believe, and obviously you're not running design quarterback runs during open practices during the spring and fall, so we maybe didn't get a great idea of Hank Brown. I'm not saying he's Lamar Jackson or anything like that. Or I'm certainly not saying he's Hank Brown, but he did get a Brendan Sullivan kind of comp from Lester in saying that they run similarly. Gronowski got a comp to Tim Tebow where he's able to really work the A gap and he's kind of able to run downhill as a quarterback, which is pretty unique. Whereas Hank and Brendan Sullivan might attack the edges of the field a little bit better and might not go in between the tackles there and try and gain yards that way. So sounds to me like Lester's not going to have to completely throw out the old playbook and recreate something for Hank Brown if it is Brown that's under center for Wisconsin. And so that's something to be optimistic about, that you're not losing everything that Gronowski adds as a runner.
Another position that we'll be probably watching pretty closely in this next Iowa game is kicker. Ethan, it's been kind of sketchy lately. What is your concern level with Iowa State's kicking game?
Yeah,
Iowa's
I
kicking
think I
game.
I think I said in my takeaways and on Sunday that it's time to be a little bit alarmed about the Drew Stevens situation because he has missed a field goal in 3 straight games. I said the first time he missed a field goal that it's not a 2023 level of panic yet, where they had to go to the backup against Nebraska to get the game-winning field goal. But it's kind of getting to the point where it's like, what do they have in Caden Burr, the Bettendorf alum, at backup if they have to turn to him? I asked LeVar Woods, the special teams coordinator, about the field goal operation on Tuesday. And I think in the way that I asked the question, he felt like I was trying to heap all the blame on Drew for those missed field goals, which I wasn't. I was just trying to get an idea of what about the field goal operation isn't going correctly, because I've seen discourse that maybe the holder isn't holding the ball correct, or the snapper isn't holding the ball correctly when he goes to snap, and that's causing the holder to get it with the laces facing Drew Stevens, and then the holder doesn't have time to get the laces out of the way, and that's obviously going to throw off the timing of everything when the holder has to spin the ball to get it in the right spot. And so that was what I was looking for, and Woods did confirm that it is an issue with all 11 guys on the field goal unit. That's the issue with the operation right now. He says we need a cleaner snap, we need a cleaner hold, and he also said, I have the utmost confidence. I have all the confidence in the world in Drew Stevens, was the exact quote. So I don't think that the Hawkeyes have lost confidence in Drew Stevens. Sounds like behind closed doors at practice, the operation looks clean, and it is where it needs to be consistent. There's just, unfortunately, there's been 3 misses in one miss in each of the last 3 games, and that's caused there to be a little bit of alarm from the public.
Well, Chase Smith is always available. If they want Iowa State's third stringer, maybe they could convince Chase Smith to head on over there to Iowa City.
I don't think they've come up quite yet with trades. They're paying players now, but trades are maybe on the 10 years down the road a little bit.
That would be a pretty cool thing to have one day. Now it's not always football here on CyHawk Talk. And Ethan, you put out a cryptic tweet yesterday. You kind of had a feel on a big commit on Iowa women's basketball front. What's the latest there?
Yeah, McKenna Woliczko, 5-star, number 6 prospect in the class, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite Industry Rankings, is committed to the Iowa women's basketball team. Huge commit. It's Jan Jensen's first 5-star. They got Addie Deal in the last class, who was a 5-star, but she committed when Lisa Bluter was still the head coach. It was a major coup to keep her committed when Jan took over as the head coach, and Addie has said, there was never really any doubt in my mind. I wanted to come to Iowa. She had a trainer tell her that, Iowa was going to be a place where she could maximize her talents. So that's ultimately why she ended up coming to Iowa. She actually reached out to Iowa first before Iowa had interest in her, because she is from California, not a recruit that the Hawkeyes are normally going to land, but maybe they're making California a little bit of a recruiting hotbed for the Hawkeyes with Woliczko, who's from San Bruno, California, goes to high school in San Jose, California. But it's a major, major win for Jan Jensen. She had a pretty good recruiting class last year, but didn't have, that 5-star that committed to her. Layla Hayes was the big commit, the center from Alaska, who was a 4-star that committed to Jensen's staff. Journey Houston was a 5-star from Davenport, but she fell to a 4-star, also a commit during the Lisa Bluter era. So this was like the first big recruiting win for Jensen. And, I put out that cryptic tweet. I got an email that all but seemed to confirm to me that Woliczko was going to commit to the Hawkeyes. There was a ton of other smoke signals as well. I mean, you could practically see the fire burning. You didn't even really need to look for the smoke signal at that point. It was just like a blazing forest fire. It's like, oh yeah, I think she's going to commit. I had the story pre-written, so I was ready to go at 10 a.m. When she committed, all I had to do was drop in an additional quote from her social media post. So that one seemed a little bit telegraphed. We'll see. There's some rumors out there about another 5-star potentially committing in this class. Woliczko was the first one. If they can land a second one, you're going to feel really good about the foundation of the women's basketball program, where a year ago, probably around this time, you were thinking, how do you rebuild from the Caitlin Clark era? Is Lucy Olson, the Villanova transfer, going to be able to carry that on? And it seems like Iowa women's basketball has managed to remain in a very healthy place post Caitlin Clark.
It is October, so basketball sneaking up on us right around the corner, both men's and women's. We'll be talking about it some on CyHawk Talk, and of course covering it all on the Quad City Times.
I mentioned that Iowa women's basketball is in a healthy place, maybe on the opposite end of the health spectrum. Iowa State secondary. Let's transition and talk about the Cyclones. What can you tell me You talked about the injuries in the state of Iowa. It seemed like it hit the Cyclones pretty hard. They're down to like their fourth string cornerback, third string quarterback at this point.
Yeah, something like that. And in Iowa State's situation, they kind of rotate him in a lot, so it's tough to tell who's third and who's fourth. But what I can tell you definitively is that number one and number two are done for the season. And it all happened in like a week. Since we last had our regular weekday recording, Jeremiah Cooper and Jontez Williams, Iowa State's cornerbacks, were seen as, centerpieces of the defense and potential NFL guys. And both are now getting surgery and have torn ACLs, is the latest there. So certainly just a brutal break for the Cyclone defense. And it it feels too easy to harken back to 2024 when a rash of linebacker injuries just completely weathered this Cyclone defense. And it's not quite to that point yet, but certainly a big blow. So that's going to be the number one thing I'm looking for as Iowa State travels to Cincinnati on Saturday is how do Quentin Taylor and Trey Bell look at those cornerback positions? Those are the two names, Cyclone fans, that are probably going to be slotting in to, the roles vacated by Williams and Cooper. And Trey Bell has looked awesome this season. He's been great. The Lindenwood transfer has popped a lot on special teams and, including in regular defensive sets. So those are going to be the two names that you look at as the big replacements. Also, with the rotation and how Iowa State likes to get guys in here, I'm looking at Benny Nagoye, the receiver from last year, who is catching passes and converted to defensive back this season. What does Benny look like now that, hey man, like they're going to need him to play? And also David Coffey comes back from an injury. He's played a couple games this season, so he was actually able to return to practice this week in a small bit of defensive back injury news. That's the good side for Iowa State. So, man, Brendan Sorsby, this Cincinnati quarterback, can sling it. That's going to be what I'm watching.
Yeah, I'm curious. You had Brendan Sorsby and the Cincinnati Bearcats as the second thing you're going to watch on the show sheet, and been interesting to kind of watch him because he had, I think, like 60 passing yards in the season opener, a loss to Nebraska. And obviously, I was watching that game as a Nebraska alum, and kind of wrote the Bearcats off. I was like, well, that's not going to probably be a quality win for the Huskers this year. And they've kind of turned things around since that poor performance in Week 1 at Arrowhead. I guess what are you looking at from that offense coming into this matchup?
I want to know which Brendan Sorsby we're going to get to watch on Saturday. You mentioned that performance in the opener against Nebraska. Well, last year when he played against Iowa State in Jack Trice Stadium, his final passing line was 10 for 18 for 66 yards. He was able to hurt the Cyclones on the ground that game. He had 144 rushing yards and a touchdown. So I certainly remember that as the mobility for Sorsby is what stuck out in that performance. But then last week, Sorsby and the Cincinnati offense go out there and hang a bunch of points in a big win against Kansas. And Sorsby throws for 388 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I'm really curious to see what this matchup looks like a year later. Cincinnati went out and got something like 6 new receivers in the transfer portal. We just talked about Iowa State's defensive back situation. It's almost going to be a completely new matchup between, the defensive backs and the receivers in this year's meetup. So I'm curious to see what the heck Sorsby looks like, and I'm anticipating maybe a little bit of a higher scoring game from Sorsby in the offense. Maybe we get a little bit more of a Big 12 shootout in this one.
If it ends up being a shootout, all points are going to matter. Third thing you're looking at Nippert Stadium is what's the field goal range of this Iowa State field goal operation? Like, take me through that. What'd you guys learn in that first opportunity to really see Chase Smith in action?
We didn't really learn much, to be brutally honest. I mean, we did hear that this last week, Kyle Conradi's, not going to be back on Saturday, so don't get ready for that. He was moving around pretty well on the field before the game. Again, doesn't sound like it'll be season ending, but I don't think we're gonna see Conradi, in the immediate future. So hey, Chase Smith, he's perfect. He's 8 for 8 on PHEs this season and 1 for 1. I think his field goal was 34 yards in the final seconds. But we talked about it on the Rewind show, Ethan. We didn't get to see Iowa State, get that range tested. They were so good from the 50-yard line to the 30-yard line in offense and so good in the red zone that Matt Kemble never really had a difficult decision to make. So in this shootout where you said every point might matter, it'll be really curious to see what the Cyclones do with Chase Smith. Maybe they go for another 2-point conversion. I mean, that play was crazy. The direct snap to Burkle on Iowa State's 2-point conversion. So I don't know, man. It'd be something if this game comes down to a Chase Smith 45-yard field goal. I would love to see what the Cyclones' comfortability is if it gets to that point.
A lot of good stuff to watch as the Cyclones take on the Bearcats. Ben will land this plane with his Sunday's headlines today, right after this.
The one tough deal, we lost Tez. Tez is going to be out for the year, so that's a situation that really stinks for the kid. But man, just how he's handled it has been uber impressive, and a great human. And he'll be back ready to rock and roll, next year. And then everybody else is good to go, so we should be in a great spot.
At that corner spot, I know Coffey's been banged up, but Quentin Taylor, Benny. I mean, how does that? Early in the process, but how does that rotation look like? Because I know you feel good about the depth in that secondary room.
Boy, we do. I think that's just the reality of it is like you're going to have injuries and the next guy's got to step up. Quentin Taylor's played, I think, almost 30 snaps a game the last 3 weeks and played really good football for us. Benny started to do a great job. We do get David Coffey back, so David practiced today. So I think we feel really confident about what that group looks like, and lucky to. I know those guys aren't participating, but their leadership is critical, and they've already done an unbelievable job. Coop had surgery and was out on the practice field today, and Tez is out there. So.
Welcome back to CyHawk Talk. Ben's going to take us home here with his Sunday's headlines today. I'll give him a grade. I was on a bye, so I don't have any headlines to really give you. Maybe the one headline was Mark Gronowski is probably going to be a game time decision in my prediction. So there's your one prediction from me this show. Otherwise, Ben, take it away.
My number one headline for Sunday after Iowa State's game against Cincinnati is The Godfather Part 2. Campbell wins again. And of course, that's a shout out to my favorite name in the whole Big 12, Dante Corleone, Cincinnati's monster defensive tackle. We're not quite sure if Corleone is going to be able to play against Iowa State. Scott Satterfield said in his press conference that he's trending in the right direction, but it sounds like it's still up in the air. That would be a huge impact in terms of what Iowa State's able to do at the offensive line of scrimmage. Carson Hansen running the ball. Certainly going to be something to watch, but Matt Campbell is the godfather when it comes to Tyson Veit and Cincinnati's defensive coordinator. They worked together for 8 years, and Campbell's gotten the better of him both times. So I think Campbell does it again. My second headline is 10 in a row. If Iowa State wins this game, it'll be their 10th consecutive victory in true road games. Now that throws out AT&T Stadium and the Big 12 Championship and Ireland and all of these different kind of neutral site games. But in true road games, Iowa State is going for 10 in a row. An unheard of streak when, if you've been following Cyclone football for forever, certainly impressive wherever you look in college football. And the Cyclones are going for that at Nippert Stadium. There's been some buzz online. I think Cincinnati fans are going to view this as a monster game. They're excited for it. It's only a 40,000 capacity stadium, but from what I hear, it gets pretty loud there. So it's not going to be an easy victory for the Cyclones, but it could be their 10th in a row. And my last headline that perhaps gives away my score prediction, I think Iowa State's going to win it, is cornered. Cyclone defense does just enough. It's going to be the place to watch, the cornerbacks, with these matchups without Jontez Williams and Jeremiah Cooper. But I think Iowa State's defense will be able to do just enough against this talented and high-powered Cincinnati passing attack. And maybe it, Rocco Becht kind of shoulders some of the burden and says, hey, we're going to go out and hang 35, 36, 37, and give this Cyclone defense a chance to kind of figure out what it's going to do without its two prominent cornerbacks. So I think Cyclones are going to win it in Nippert Stadium, and it'll be a lot of fun to watch.
I was really skeptical about those headlines, just reading them with no context, and the context is really, it's really put them, pull them all together. So I was going to go A-, but I got to remember the spelling error you made in the show sheet. So we're going to bump it down to a B+ for you on the headlines. That'll do it for CyHawk Talk here on a Wednesday. We'll be back on Sunday to recap that matchup between the Cyclones and Bearcats. Maybe any more information we get about the Hawkeye injuries. But be sure to tune in for that. But thank you for watching.